This is a bit of a standalone episode as we're revisiting a conversation that we recorded in 2022, but which has some relevance to an event that WTC held recently. Tim Mackie of the BibleProject came across to the UK to hold a special teaching day for WTC, which was just a wonderful and rich time, where Tim linked Genesis 1-3 with our understanding of the Trinity and human desire. You can get access to this teaching on our website at wtctheology.org.uk/events. But the last time Tim was in the UK was for the 24/7 prayer conference a couple of years ago, and he sat down with me and our principal Lucy Peppiatt to talk about his growing appreciation for the writings of the early church fathers and mothers and systematic theology, not as in competition with Hebrew thought, but as a development in understanding of the God revealed in the Hebrew Bible and ultimately in the person of Jesus. So, we thought it would be good to share this conversation with you again, and if you find it interesting, please subscribe to the TheoDisc podcast for more enlightening conversations on all things theological. Now, here's Tim Mackie in conversation with Lucy Peppiatt. On this episode, we are delighted to have Tim Mackie with us of the BibleProject. Welcome, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be with you guys.
Also in conversation with Tim will be our principal, Lucy Peppiatt.
Great. Hi.
And we're going to have some conversation today about how Lucy and Tim have been collaborating a little bit recently and some areas of overlap in the things that we're thinking about right now. But before we get into our conversation, Tim, I would like to ask you three questions that we're asking every new guest on our podcast, just to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
So these are about things that you return to, things that are comforts for you, and it's a book, a meal or a food, or a place. So they don't have to be definitive answers. We won't hold you to this.
Wait, and I'm doing one of each?
One of each.
I can pick one of those three.
No, one of each.
Oh, okay. All
For
right.
each one.
You're not
See,
getting...
the pressure's on.
Yeah,
I told
totally.
you.
Okay. I'll take them in reverse order.
Go for it.
Because this last two are easier. So as far as a place, I live in Portland, Oregon, which is about an hour and a half west of a large volcano mountain that's in the chain of the Cascade Mountains. There's a bunch of big volcanoes. So Mount Hood is the one closest to us, and it's just my favorite place in the world.
Oh.
The south side is where all the ski resorts are, so not there. But on the west, north, and east side, it's just wilderness, and it's a remarkable place. So that's a place I go to whenever I can go for a hike.
Great.
The middle one was food.
Yeah.
Green curry.
Nice choice.
Green curry. Yeah, with the bamboo shoots real tender.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Sounds good.
Part of it. And a book. My whole life is books.
I know.
But just pick one, Tim.
Okay, well, one that has been important probably in the last 5 years that I've reread 3 times and keep learning from it is The Experience of God by David Bentley Hart. He's exploring classical theism in a way that I felt like I was learning about theism for the first time, and in a deeply personal way. And that book has really actually helped me. It's restored my faith in ways that I didn't know I was lacking faith in really beautiful ways. So anyway, that's been a very important book to me in the last 5 years.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, now we know you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Well, let's get into our conversation that we're going to talk about today. And I guess a good place to start would be, how did you guys meet?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of over to you, Tim, because
Yes.
you emailed me
I did.
a few years ago now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the BibleProject, we started making and still do make short animated explainer videos about the Bible and biblical theology. But we also started filming seminary level classes with students that are chosen from our BibleProject audience and support community. And so we have been filming live classes and just me nerding out on the Torah, mostly, touring through the Torah. But we began to invite guest professors, and as I thought about who would be some of the first people that I would want to have teach for the BibleProject classroom, it was Lucy came to mind, and it's just I had read all your books on Corinthians and learned so much, and it was like hey, you don't know me, but hello, I'm Tim, and Lucy, would you want to ever come teach a class? And you said yes.
I did.
And
although I had no idea what I'd said yes to at the time.
Yes. Well,
yeah. Then was very surprised when I realised what I'd said yes to. But I was deeply honoured. But I didn't really believe the request to start with, because there are many, many wonderful 1 Corinthians scholars out there, and so I was surprised and honoured and thought it was an enormous privilege, and so I did say yes, to teach at the BibleProject, which eventually happened because it got postponed a lot through
that's right,
pandemic.
because of COVID. Yep.
And so we filmed in February. So I met Tim face to face. We'd had a couple of Zooms, and we knew we got on well, so that was a relief.
Yeah, that's right.
I was hoping he wasn't going to get too worried. And then we filmed in February.
Yeah. And we're really excited to see that ship sail.
I'm very excited.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned an app.
Oh, yeah. So we released the BibleProject app in January of 2022. And right now it's a place where all the videos and the podcasts, everything we've ever made is all put together. But the classroom is going to be available within the app too. Late 2022 or early 2023, and your class will be in there on the app too. And what we're really excited about for the app is to begin to create a Bible reading tool that isn't just like a scrolling, kind of scroll through your Bible, but really all hyperlinked to different resources, so that whenever you're reading anywhere, you can just start clicking away to all kinds of different resources about the text that you're reading in the moment. And so eventually all the classes will get cut into snippets or sessions and then linked to the Bible reader, so that when somebody's in 1 Corinthians 11, they could just click and do that 20-30 minute session, for example, on it. So we're really excited about the possibilities for the BibleProject app.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. So we met, and obviously we get on really well, and I think we have a lot of shared theological values, I would say, and which I really appreciate. I mean, I love the BibleProject work, but it's deeper than that. I think it's to do with how we understand the nature of God in some ways, and that's kind of what I think we wanted to talk about today, of how we come to that big question of who God is and how do we understand who he is from different perspectives, because I'm a systematic theologian, which I was surprised to be asked to do a Bible thing, and obviously Tim is a Bible scholar, so
And this is interesting because both of you are involved in making theology accessible to people, so there's a real sense of similar vision and mission in what you both do. And I think what's interesting about what we might talk about today is how you are both having a conversation across your own disciplines. Even when you just spoke there about doing the class in 1 Corinthians and being a systematic theologian and bringing that to bear on that. Maybe we can talk about what are some of the conversations that you've been having around Christology and how both of your disciplines are maybe overlapping in that.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think one place to start was the most exciting conversation we had recently. Was I shared about, I took a whole summer. I began to realize over the years that I was really underread in the first centuries of early church scholarship and theology, early church fathers and mothers. There's some important mothers,
Yeah.
especially Macarena. So I just spent a summer just reading in early church scholars in theology, and it was so amazing. And this is after decades of just sitting mainly and only in Hebrew Bible, Second Temple, Jewish literature, and New Testament. And I was just astounded by what a misperception I had of these early theologians from those first centuries, and how much I have been learning from them.
And what was because I've heard this a lot of
Yes.
people not engaging with the church fathers and mothers or the patristics because they had some sense of suspicion or weren't sure about the soundness of their theology.
Yeah, sure.
And what was the misperception that you were under?
Yeah. I feel silly now because it was so uninformed. But it was my basic mindset was, well, there's like the biblical period, and there's the progress of Revelation, and so ancient Israel, Judaism, early Christianity. But my misperception was once the Jesus movement became majority non-Israelite, and then into these early centuries, my misperception was that the early church fathers were taking the biblical legacy and translating it so heavily into Greek or Hellenistic philosophical categories that it just became something different. And so debates about, homoousios or homoiousios in the Christology debates, or just all of this essence and God's essence and persons and substance and natures. I was like, what? None of that's in the Bible. So they're just taking the whole thing in a different direction, and so I'm just going to do like the Bible thing. And I could not have been more wrong about what the early church fathers and mothers were up to. And it was like getting a spanking. An intellectual spanking.
From Irenaeus.
From the fathers and mothers.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
And one part of it is just I realized like these people were actually more culturally close to the culture and language and thought categories of Jesus and the apostles.
Yeah.
That it's much more likely that I'm like the estranged relative who thinks the Bible thinks like me. But in reality, it's much more the case that they were in tune with. But what also is, it seems to me, and this is where our conversation is interesting, it seems to me is they actually took much of the biblical tradition for granted. And what they were trying to do was bring a level of precision and nuance to essentially the portrait of the nature of God.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
there in the biblical tradition. But they were doing it to a degree that Jesus and the apostles and the prophets didn't need to because of the time and circumstances of the origins of the Bible. But they, if anything, they were bringing a level of clarity because they understood the biblical portrait of God in ways that I am still coming to reckon with.
Yeah.
And that was just so exciting for me because I realized like my way of even conceiving of God's character has been fully shaped by these early theologians, and I didn't even know it.
Right.
Until I read them. And so it's just been an exciting discovery in kind of my own intellectual journey.
Well, I was excited to hear that because I've been teaching Christian doctrine now for about 13 years. And, I was trained in systematic theology, discovered the early church fathers and absolutely loved them. I feel like it's a treasure trove, that we have. And all the resources are free and available on the internet. You could just go and read. And people often say to me, so why do you privilege those texts? If when you're looking at systematic theology, why do you go back to those texts as authoritative in addition to the scriptures? And the part of the answer is the proximity to the original events. And that they did have an advantage. So there are lots of different reasons, but and they did understand the mindset and the culture and the world views that they were theologically reflecting on. And partly it's that you can see they've survived. And so, and your experience of encountering them, these mostly men, let's face it, although Macrina was important, that encountering them is that they had their own deep relationship with God. And it was that they were trying to articulate was how can we most truthfully tell this story again to our people. And so one of the things we were going to talk about this afternoon is their wrestlings with Christology, or the nature of Jesus Christ, the person and work of Jesus Christ. That was the biggest thing on their agenda for the first 300 years, is how do we speak most truthfully about Jesus, this God-man? And that's what you're reading, aren't you? Reading some of their responses to that.
Do you think, this has been a reframing for me, though I think if we could go sit down with Gregory of Nyssa or Athanasius and we want to talk about Christology, would he even know what we're talking about?
No.
For them, it's just theology.
Christology. Yeah.
We're trying to discern who God is.
Exactly.
And okay, I've always wanted to ask you that question.
No, they wouldn't.
Because they didn't separate these theological topics.
No.
For them, it was all just
it's
ways
all theology.
Exactly.
Yeah. But the Bible is theology.
Right.
Yeah. So it's all because it's all thoughts and words about God.
Yeah.
So what they were just trying to do was to articulate these truths, to give some stability to the church and to safeguard that. It was like putting guardrails up to the thinking of the early church. There were a lot of threats that were coming in this, in terms of Christology or who Jesus is, and they had to bat them off.
Yeah.
And then they had to give good reasons for why they were batting them off, because it couldn't be personal, or we don't like that person. It had to be highly sophisticated debate about the nature of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So one of the things that I was interested to talk to Tim about was, because you've done masses of work on the context of the incarnation of when the Son arrives as Jesus of Nazareth, and the kind of Old Testament or the run up to Jesus. And how people were conceptualizing God, how the Jews were conceptualizing God, and also perhaps the Greeks, and the Romans, and then the impact of Jesus and his teachings on them. That's one of the things that I think would be interesting to hear about.
Yeah. Well, one of the main issues to face in what is now like the scholarly field of early Christology, trying to discern the early roots of the early Christian claims about Jesus. And a big part of that field is understanding Jewish conceptions of the God of Israel in the Hebrew Bible and Second Temple literature. And so, I've been taking deep dives into that for a long time. And what really struck me was, so I've worked hard to understand what is the native portrait of God just within the Hebrew Bible itself. And it's remarkably nuanced.
Right.
So there's the Shema, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. So there's the unity of God. But I think in that context, which is from Deuteronomy, the emphasis on the oneness of God is in contrast to other gods, like Baal or Marduk. But then when you actually get into the narrative and poetic portraits of who God is within the Hebrew Bible, it's really nuanced, and it's not simple. So, classic topics here are like the angel of the Lord. When the angel of the Lord appears to Moses or to Gideon, and the narrator will just say, the angel of the Lord appeared. And the angel of the Lord, it's a messenger, it's a mediator, with the conception meaning Yahweh is high, transcendent above. Moses couldn't look on God in his essence, or else he'd be fried or something. But God can send a mediator, the messenger. But then, this is a burning bush story. But then when the messenger starts speaking, the narrator just stops saying the messenger of Yahweh and just says, and Yahweh said to Moses, and Moses said to Yahweh. And you're like, wait a minute.
Totally blurred the lines.
Yes, you're like, wait, so, and you can just carry this through. Within the Hebrew Bible, there is this portrait of God in his utter transcendent essence, who's in the cloud, right? To use the Mount Sinai imagery. But then the ways that God will make himself accessible, visible, comprehensible to a human partner. And here are all of the core characters, as it were, in the Hebrew Bible, are the angel of the Lord, the word of the Lord, which interacts with Jeremiah, like the word of the Lord is like a person that talks to him and that he sees. You're like, what does that mean? And or God's wisdom in Proverbs, or God's spirit. And so it seems to me the Hebrew Bible authors are staking out a space to talk about. It's really hard to find language that now is the language that I've learned from the early church fathers, about distinct personages within God, the utter transcendent God, the God become visible in these forms, and that the biblical authors have these categories.
So I think what I found really helpful was when you said they had some kind of conceptual framework that there was more than one.
Yes.
There was one.
Yes.
But within that one, there was more than one.
Yes.
So no one's making grand claims for a Trinity in the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we can't.
Yep.
But what you're saying as a Hebrew Bible scholar is that there's intimations of plurality in some way, not lots of gods, but
it's
something
it
within.
Is the messenger of Yahweh.
Yes,
it is
and the mediator.
That's right.
To humanity.
Yes. Yep.
And so and the Spirit.
Yeah.
So looking forward to this time. So what you're saying to me is that it makes it seem almost sort of less alien, the Incarnation as a less alien breaking through into a whole new, completely new way of understanding God. But it's it's something that God has been working towards in some way.
Yes. Yeah. So my next step was into Second Temple pre-Christian, but Second Temple Jewish literature. And when you look at concepts of mediating figures between God and humans, what you find is that those, and they were all Bible nerds. They were just Hebrew Bible nerds, nerds of the Hebrew Bible. And whether it's in the Dead Sea Scroll literature or the literature we now call the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha, it's populated with these exalted divine mediator figures. And even like famously in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a whole scroll, 11Q Melchizedek, that depicts Melchizedek, like the guy that Abraham met, as this divine human who's going to come bring God's judgment on all the nations, in the apocalypse. These mediator figures get names, like in the Enoch literature. Yeah. And so these are like Jewish authors who are more connected to the context of the Hebrew Bible. And they see a unity and plurality within God's nature or being. Yeah. And so, I guess the point is that when Jesus and the apostles come onto the scene, claiming the things that they do, in one sense, there's a deep continuity with this. But on another sense, there's a radical discontinuity with the unique claim that Jesus was making about himself and then the apostles made about him, which wasn't just that he's like a created angel, or like just a highly exalted mediator, but that he truly, like in John, it's most on the surface in the Gospel of John. I and the Father are one. You've seen me, you've seen the Father. But I think those same claims in John are implicit in the narrative argument of the Synoptic Gospels. Like even just in Mark chapter 1, where he starts quoting from Isaiah and Malachi about Yahweh coming in person. Yeah. And then with a messenger ahead of him. And then he introduces John. And then you're like, and I'm waiting for Yahweh, and then Jesus gets baptized. Come as well. And of course the baptism scene of the Father addressing the Son through the Spirit. Yeah. And you're like, right there, you're dealing with the same type of dynamic as in the Hebrew Bible with the Yahweh and the angel of Yahweh.
So what's so fascinating is that, so if we ourselves would have what we would call a high Christology, where we accept that Jesus, the God-man, shares his identity, is Yahweh, the second person of the Trinity, and has come to earth. And but the early church struggled with thinking, with a thinking that was that Jesus was slightly lower. So this mediator figure, who was also fully human, was not quite on the same level. And there were different permutations of that thought, whether it was adoptionism, which was an early form of it, that, it was just a normal person who had been born a boy and then God adopts him as a son in a sort of anointed sense, or whether, as then Arius later took up this idea that the creation had been created through Christ, but so Christ, because he was also part of the creation, was just a bit lower.
Yes.
And in that sense, Arius wanted to safeguard the transcendence of God, because God should not be associated with that mediator person. So Jesus was what they call a demiurge, or the person who, did the work in between. And so how I would be interested in your thoughts on that, especially now that you're reading the patristics and seeing the way that, so you mentioned the homoousios or homoousion principle, which is for that Jesus, the Son, is of one substance, or of one, the same essence, the same substance as the Father, which is the word they put into the Nicene Creed, which was very controversial, and Arius did not hold to that at all. And that wasn't resolved when they put it into the Nicene Creed at 325.
Yeah,
it
that's
just,
right.
this debate and discussion and dissension just rumbled for really centuries, probably, but definitely the whole of the 4th century. So what are your thoughts on that, about, in a sense, the ease with which the early Christians could think that this was an adoptionist story, or that Jesus was just a bit lower, and the way that the early church fathers had to really defend that space?
Well, what's fascinating to me is that, the New Testament claims about the nature and identity of God in Jesus, that they are on one level like extremely clear, but they also stake out a territory where you could nuance the relationship between Jesus and God in a few different ways, and everybody can quote the Bible, right? It's very similar to our day with views about pick your topic, and everybody can appeal to the Bible. And so what do you do in those circumstances? And so it seems like the discussion there was not just, can you pull on different Bible verses from the Gospels or from Proverbs or Genesis, but like, which portrait of God is most true to the greatest amount of portrait of revelation of God in Scripture, but also to the deep logic of the biblical story. Yeah,
the coherency of it.
That's right. And so it seems like what all these early church fathers and mothers are doing is they're actually not, and this is just in 3 months of reading a ton, but my sense is that they weren't trying to make claims and describe the nature of God and God's own hidden essence. What they are more trying to do is mark off dead ends and say, if we talk about Jesus as a supreme but created creature that connects us to God, then just follow that logic out, and it gets you to a Savior that can't truly save us.
Exactly.
And so it's more like they're trying to mark off dead ends so that we more clearly understand the portrait of God and his essence that we all know we can't fully understand. But it's trying to protect that thing about the nature of God. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of explaining it.
No, I think you're doing a great job.
But
that's what I think systematic theology, that's the heart of it. And that's why I find it such a thrilling subject, as we were talking about, because you get to deliberate and ponder the very nature of God and how he interacts with the world. And I don't know what you feel after reading them, but I find the church fathers very humble in their acknowledgement of not being able to do that. I mean, we're human and we have these little brains that can't articulate everything about God, but we do our best. And we do our best because we want to be faithful to Scripture. So they were exegetes, as you were saying. You know, the Bible is all over their work. And it's a sort of protective mechanism of the church and of the gospel that they were engaged in this theological work.
I'm thinking, just because I was reading it most recently as my bedtime reading, don't judge me. But Gregory of Nazianzus,
that's kind of like my bedtime reading.
Oh, really? There you go. Yes. So Gregory of Nazianzus, he lives late 300s.
He was 4th century.
So he has these 5 orations that are kind of like one of his most important works. But the first oration is really just all these really brilliant short little essays about how God, in God's own hidden essence, will be eternally unknowable to us. Because it's just, my analogy, it's like a dog trying to teach a dog algebra. It's just they're not capable of grasping. But then he just flips it and he says real quick and to say, but saying that something is in its essence unknowable does not therefore mean we can't know anything about it.
Yes, exactly.
And then he just turns to the gospel narratives and he starts to work out the implications of if what Jesus claims about himself is the case, then what we can know about God is, and he just starts like filling it out logically. And I think for me, what was so helpful was, I think when I remember first being introduced to the debates about, is God of the similar essence, homoousios, or is Jesus of similar essence with the Father, or homoousios, the same essence? And it's the difference of one Greek letter, right?
One iota of a difference.
Totally. And so, really, when I was introduced to this, I was like, oh gosh, those early church fathers, they're making such a big deal out of one letter. But I realized, like, what's really at stake isn't just like who God is. It's a whole vision of reality. You actually end up with 2 different visions of what kind of universe we're living in. Depending on your understanding of that one little iota. And I think that struck me in a new way this summer, that these debates are so charged with high stakes in those early centuries because they do really result in fundamentally different views of reality. Of reality.
And of who we are. Because all our anthropology flows out of who we think Jesus is. And so if we compromise on the full divinity of Christ, the idea that the Son would unite himself to humanity is a lesser story, if you see what I mean. If the Son is really the Son who is fully divine, of one essence with the Father, so he is God, then the Incarnation is a story of God who has come to unite himself with his creatures. So how much does he love us to do that? But if he's only sent his second in command, as it were, well, I won't come, but there's someone who can kind of sit in the middle of us both and be a buffer between you and me. It's a different story.
It's, totally different.
It's kind of like, well, what we always feared to be true, that we couldn't get quite that close to God, is probably true.
Okay, so here's what's great. So I've been working in the book of Exodus recently for some projects I'm working on, BibleProject. So this is the debate Moses is having with God after the golden calf. And God says to Moses, like, these people, they're hard of heart, I'm not going to go with you guys. You guys go into the land. And Moses is like, no, we need you to go. And what Yahweh says is, I'll send my messenger. I'll send the angel of Yahweh. And then what Moses says is not good enough. He says, how will we be known as separate from the nations if your face, it's the word face.
That we have presence.
Yeah,
right?
if you're present.
Okay.
And so what God does, he responds to Moses' intercession by saying, okay, my face will come with you. So even right there in that debate, Moses isn't satisfied with just a created mediator. What he knows is for the biblical story to really be about the union of God with his creatures in love, that it has to be God himself.
It has to be.
So that's a good example where that's a Hebrew Bible author
continuity.
Working it out.
Yeah.
And so you say, well, what kind of climax of the biblical story is most in line with that portrait, like right there at Mount Sinai? And and that's what all of the pro-Nicene theologians were saying. Only one portrait of God will truly be consistent with what's claimed about Jesus in continuity with the Hebrew Bible, and then also will truly be an invitation to all humans to be joined in union to their Creator.
Exactly.
And it was all like, everything was high stakes. It was like every topic you can imagine was at stake in those early centuries.
Because what is unassumed is unhealed, as Gregory Nazianzus says, that if God hasn't taken it up into himself, then it still hasn't been made incorruptible.
Yes, that's right.
So Ivor Davidson, who's one of my favourite theologians, he says the whole of patristic theology can be summed up in the question, how close can God come?
Oh, that's well said. That's exactly right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And that was the offence. This is what people like Arius and Nestorius and the people who were, and Apollinaris, people who were later, sadly for them, named as heretics, and this position is heretical, which is really just a way of saying the distortion of the faith.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be easier to believe a heresy. It's going to be more conceptually challenging to deal with the reality of how God has dealt with us. But that, so that is the question.
Yeah, that's a great
they
way
were
of
wrestling with it.
Yes.
Because he'd come too close, basically.
Yeah. Maybe another, I think, misperception that I had about those early centuries was, I kind of already said it, that just they were needlessly trying to be precise about nitpicking. Yeah. But this is where it became very personal to me, where I realized, I have fundamental assumptions about who it is that I am in relationship with. When I say I know God, and I talk to that God every day, actually, first thing, right, every day. And it's who do I think I'm talking to? And I think what they cared about so deeply was that we are relating to the person of God in a way that truly reflects who God is. Now, will God allow people to know him who don't fully understand who he is? Well, of course, that's all of us. But if we have the chance to speak more truly of God than I did yesterday, by just thinking a little more clearly and going back to the sources and to the tradition, then why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
It's sort of the same with my wife in seeking to know her, which often means learning things about her that I thought I knew, but I realized I didn't know.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, the early fathers became another resource for me in that journey of knowing God. That I don't know why. It took me, I've been following Jesus 25 years.
No, but it's so good to hear things like this, because coming to know God is going to take us forever. And it's a wonderful pursuit, and it is bit by bit, isn't it? Little bit by little bit.
Yes.
And it's a joy and a privilege, and the more we learn, the more we know we don't know. And, but it's like this, it just draws you in, doesn't it? The not knowing draws you in to wanting to know more.
Yes.
And I think it's great, and I think it's great for people listening to realize that someone as well versed in the scriptures and as intelligent as you are and as well read as you are still learning new and exciting things. And I feel that every day, and it's just it's great.
Gregory of Nyssa, who I really fell in love with, he has this wonderful image. He has there's a short commentary on the life of Moses. It's just called The Life of Moses. Okay. Yeah, it's really great. And he retells the whole story of Moses as an allegory or a metaphor for the soul's journey to know God. And so ascending Mount Sinai is, he kind of takes the Moses story that way. But he has this wonderful kind of phrase where he talks about to truly know God will be, like what you just said, an eternal journey. Because God and God's nature is infinite potential and power and beauty and creativity. So he uses this phrase of an eternal stretching out of the human soul. Epictasis.
Yeah. It's a great idea.
It's so wonderful.
The more God fills you with himself, the more you expand to take him into you.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. It's just, it gave me this new image of what growth is.
Right.
Like we think of human development and kids grow up and we're continually growing, or maybe we get old and stodgy and we stop growing. But his vision of the existence of a human in union with God is an infinite stretching towards and growing into the infinite nature of God. It's just so beautiful.
And it's partly has a sort of connotation of striving, like sort of reaching towards. But I also read I'm reading a brilliant book at the moment by someone called Adonis Vidu on the Trinity. And he uses the analogy of a magnet, of God as a magnet. He uses it very well. Anyway, that's for a different conversation. But the magnet, being drawn. So I think that works really well with Gregory's idea of epictasis, that you're being pulled, and you're almost being pulled to more and more and more of being filled with God, and that's freedom.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And joy.
Yes. So to bring it all the way back around, what has been really helpful for me, why I named David Bentley Hart's book on the experience of God. He's naming 3 parts of human experience that, if you really drill down, all of them point to the nature of the classical God of theism as being the only one. So being, consciousness, and bliss.
Right.
And bliss being the fact that humans are just these like infinite, empty holes of desire. That no matter what we do to meet our desires, they all of a sudden they're there again tomorrow. Yeah. And so this has been really helpful for me, especially I'm a bookaholic, and I'm just like what I said. I find something new, and then all of a sudden the whole summer's gone. Yeah. And I do a bunch of reading, and then I'm like, well, there's not enough time in my life anymore to learn about all the stuff I want to learn about. There's this, it's a desire, and what Bentley Hart talks about is like, what are we looking for? What am I looking to? There's some deficiency that I'm trying to fill, and it's a lack of understanding. Right? And I want to understand more and more and more. And it's this insatiable appetite. And we all have different versions of these. Yeah. And we meet them in dysfunctional ways. But you can channel them in healthy ways. And so even while learning about this whole field of early Christian theology that I could give the rest of my life to, I just have to put my hands up and be like, it's okay. Because what they would, I think, say to me is, just read us if you want, but really, know God. Yeah, yeah. He's the one who will infinitely satisfy that desire. Because that's really what I'm looking for when I'm reading all this stuff anyway. So it's become really personal, too. And so ironically, I can't get enough of reading them now. But at the same time, it's also making me realize that what I'm looking for won't be satisfied by buying another book.
No.
Even though I usually
do
go buy another book.
I know.
But you know what I'm saying.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just, to completely change tack, I think it's really funny that your misperception about systematics is that it was nitpicky as a Bible scholar. Because in my Bible scholars nitpick over a word.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Don't they?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I'm like, wait, who are you calling nitpicky? Just had to throw that
That's
one in
funny.
there.
No, I've never heard you say that before. That's good.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
I know.
Yeah.
So maybe we're all nitpicky.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's really interesting to think about, that this misconception of the church fathers and mothers is that they are trying to box God in by definition.
Right. It's just the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's this invitation into the mystery of who God is. And sometimes I come across people speaking about the Hebrew Bible and saying it's quite hard to get a definitive answer on who God is. It's very mysterious. And what's interesting, I think, in this conversation is we've kind of come at it from both directions, from the mystery of the Old Testament, the mystery that we're invited into in the church fathers and mothers, all centering on the person of Jesus, into knowing who God is. And so it's been great to have this conversation, to get some, at least an invitation into finding some of those footholds about how can we talk about this God who is beyond our knowledge and our experience, but makes himself accessible to us.
But I think it also helps realize that like right now in our current scene, which is, my context in the US, yours here in the UK, but the theological debates of our age are usually almost always recycled debates.
Always
that have
rehashed.
Already been worked through. And
Totally.
if we feel like they're new and dramatic, it's probably just because we haven't revisited or even know that these debates have been had
Exactly.
like centuries ago, and by people who are way smarter than most any of us on the scene today.
Yeah.
Which is another important learning, I think, too, about that we're a part of an ongoing tradition and conversation about things that are really just essential to all of us, which is why every generation has had to deal with them.
So you see, and now you're a systematic theologian.
I guess I am.
I knew we'd get you there.
I guess I am. Yeah.
What's wonderful about the Bible Project and I guess WTC is the opening of that door to read and to understand about what's come before. And I always say, it's wonderful to discover that Christianity wasn't invented in 1970. There were centuries of wisdom.
Yeah, or 1870, or 1770, and so on. Yeah.
So I would just have a question for you, Tim, having come to the Church Fathers recently. For anyone listening, who would you, where would you say would be a good place to start from your perspective?
Well, I I tried starting with Origen.
Yeah, maybe I wouldn't.
In its first principles, and I would not recommend that.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. Although come to it at some
eventually,
point, but not start.
It's kind of like the deep end of the pool, even though he was like early. I started with Athanasius on the Incarnation.
Yeah,
and it feels like it's brilliant. It's hard to believe that it's
book,
like
Kenny,
You're singing Lucy's song. That was her favorite book.
Really?
That was my answer to what was my favorite book that I go back to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Yes. Oh, yes. And then a close second would be Gregor of Nyssa's On the Soul and Resurrection.
Yes.
Which
he got from Macrina.
Well, exactly. The whole thing is framed as that Socratic dialogue between he and his sister, but it's his sister that's schooling him.
Exactly.
And
on her deathbed.
And she's brilliant.
Yes.
Oh, because their brother, Basil had just died.
Yeah.
And so they're processing their brother's death, and it becomes this narrative about a biblical theology of the soul, death, and resurrection, where she's teaching him.
Yes.
And it's absolutely brilliant.
And he calls her the teacher.
Yes.
As the brothers they used to call her
Importantly
the teacher.
so.
Yeah.
So that comes in a close second.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Great.
Those are great places to start.
Next time we talk together, hopefully there will be a next time, we can talk about Lucy's discoveries of Hebrew Bible and what she's uncovered.
That might be a while. I'll get there.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right.
Well, thank you guys. It's been a real privilege to sit in on this conversation. And Tim, thank you for joining us and taking the time.
Yep, my idea of a good time. Yep.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.